You're listening to Rogue Table Talks. Here's Mike.
Okay, we're off. We're back at it once again. Rogue Table Talks, number 127, RTT 127. Available where all your fine podcasts are sold or given away for free, in our case. RogueTableTalks.com, RTT on the YouTube. And you're listening to us here, wherever you're listening to us. You can keep listening to us here, I suppose. Here we are. It's a fine, we're kind of getting autumn here. Like sometimes we don't really, it's hot until it gets really cold. So now we kind of have, 50s, low 60s, it's sort of autumnish. And so it's kind of nice. It's a sunny day, got a little bit of color coming in. It's not hot, it's not cold. Pretty good. Pretty good here in the heartland.
Yeah. Leaves are
changing. One more season. This was always my favorite time of year. And I think partly because I kind of had positive connotations about school. Like going back to school was sort of I don't know. Yeah. When I was a kid, I was probably just sick of summer, sick of nothing to do. So, yeah, that's probably the deal. So anyway, I like fall.
Anticipation about change.
Yeah. Fall's good. So we're in Galatians. We've been in Galatians for a while, and I think we have, what some say is Paul's most obscure passage. One of the more obscure passages in the New Testament, I think. It's an obscure New Testament passage that refers to an Old Testament passage. So let me read it, and we can just kind of, like I said, this may not be a real long podcast because we might run out of intelligent things to say pretty quickly. But we'll see how it goes. Okay, so it's Galatians 4, starting at verse 21. And, Paul is talking to these Galatians about they were saved by grace, by faith, and they want to go back to the law. It's kind of that's the overall back and forth of this letter. And so, starting in verse 21, Paul says, "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. Now this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother." You with me so far? "For it is written," yes. Old Testament reference, "Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, for you are not in labor. For the child of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Now you brothers," Paul continues, "like Isaac, are children of promise. But just as at that time, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman." Okay, so.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to say. So there's this, this sense of, contrasting between grace and faith and the law, and the Galatians' desire to keep the law, and so on. And it refers to something from the Old Testament. There's Abram and Sarah. Is it Abraham and Sarah yet, or is it Abram and Sarai at this point? I don't remember. But looking back, he's always called Abraham at this point. And God gave a promise to Abraham and Sarah that they would bear a son, and that son would be the bearer of the promise of a people, a law, a land, all of the promises to Abraham of a nation. And they got impatient. The son didn't come They got older. Abraham got to be like 90. Still no dice. And so they got impatient, and Hagar, the servant woman, was used as a surrogate. And had bore a son, but was not the son of promise. And later, miraculously, Sarah bears her own child in her extreme old age, and that's Isaac. So those are the two children. That's the son of the slave woman, son of the free woman. So that's sort of what that's coming from. And there's this sense of God made this promise that Abraham would believe by faith. And in real life, Abraham gets antsy and tries to make the promise come true, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Is that basically what's going on here? You got any more to add to that in terms of basic understanding of what the deal is here?
No, it seems like there's several layers going on here. There's that story, which you kind of have to know that the promise would come through Abraham and Sarah. And then there's the story that Abraham took matters into his own hands and said to Sarah, let me sleep with, have surrogate, and it was her maidservant, Hagar.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. And then eventually he has Isaac through Sarah. So there's these two children, one born from promise, one born from, that's what the flesh is saying. So yeah, you have to know that, but then you kind of have to know, he says it can be interpreted allegorically. So the allegory is each woman represents a covenant, and then you have to kind of know what covenants he's talking about, and what are the implications drawn from that covenant. That's, I think, what he's getting at. And Mount Sinai representing Hagar, which Mount Sinai is where the law was given, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Am I right on
right. That? Yeah. So that represents the law. Yeah.
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 But it's interesting to me, he doesn't, at least in this passage, he says, this is allegorically the women are two covenants. Here's the one, the law. But does he explicitly say, here's the other covenant?
Well, he says in verse 28, now you brothers like Isaac are children of promise. I think that's as close as he comes.
He's talking about the Abrahamic?
Yes, that we are the children. We are the fulfillment of the promise given to Abraham and Sarah through Isaac. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah. Either I was thinking either he's talking about the Abrahamic covenant or the new covenant in Jesus, but I think you're right. I think he's talking about the Abrahamic covenant, we are children of promise. So, how many ever hundreds of years before the law was given?
Yes.
The Abrahamic covenant was made.
Yes.
And there was no law.
Right. Yeah, and if you look at it that way, obviously the new covenant through Christ is a further fulfillment of the original Abrahamic covenant. We are the children of Abraham through faith. He was the original one whose faith reckoned him as righteousness. And so kind of, so what he's saying is sort of, it's a kind of a long convoluted example of, hey, if you're trying to live by the law, this is what the law says, and you can't do it. If you could try to take the promise into your own hands and make it true yourselves, which is, kind of what the Galatians were doing, which is what we can do. The promise to be transformed, the promise to be made new. If we want to take that thing over and make it happen ourselves, we can't do it. We're enslaved to that. That Ishmael, the child born to Hagar, was sort of a reflection of, nothing bad about him per se. He couldn't do anything about it, but that was an expression of Abraham and Sarah really not having faith that God was going to come through, getting impatient, trying to make it happen themselves, right? And so that's the sort of thing that, that's the general description of what we're talking about. One of the things that I think is interesting, I kind of like to throw out there, is verse 29. But just as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. So, that could be, again, there's probably a wide range of application or interpretation for that Ishmael was older and treated Isaac harshly in the story, right? That the Judaizers are like Ishmael, persecuting the Galatian Christians who are like Isaac, maybe. I also think that within me, there's like two warring factions in a sense. And in a sense, the person, the me who wants to take matters into my own hand, in a sense, persecutes, the me that's, saved by grace and transformed by grace. Now, that obviously is not explicitly there, but if I apply this to my life, it's not just a history lesson, either for the Old Testament or for this period in Galatia, that I think there's a bigger picture there of that is in general happening all the time. What do you think? That's if I was writing a commentary, I'd throw that in there, but I don't really have any proof for it.
Well, I think you would if you went to Romans 7 and you talked about those who live according to the flesh, or those who live according to the Spirit. And then Romans 7 talks about the war going on between the flesh and the Spirit within us. That I just think when we're talking about the parts of that constitute a person, it's pretty complex. Yeah. So it's not just one self. It's probably not even just two selves. It's probably multiple representations of the self. So there's part of us that lives according to grace, that works with the Spirit or wants to work with the Spirit. There's a part of us that doesn't, that wants to be law-oriented, or a part of us that wants to be flesh-oriented, wants to live according to gratify our own egocentric desires or quick pleasures. So I think there is this war going on back and forth inside of us. That part of us wants to be free, and we understand what that means. And maybe there's part of us that doesn't.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, so I think that a couple of points there that you're kind of saying we're whole people, we're whole complicated people.
Maybe. Yeah, I think so. And maybe the weight of freedom and grace for part of us is too heavy to bear. So too much uncertainty there. Get back into the law.
Yeah, because I think there's part of us is like, well, I believe in grace, so this can't be happening to me because I believe in grace. Where that's not that simple, that I can believe in grace. It's like the man who says, I believe, help my unbelief. Hey, Jesus, I believe, but help my unbelief. It's not just a matter of, our whole self is complicated, and I can believe in grace, and then also part of me fighting against grace. And so the why is that so, I think, is where you were going next. And I think it's a super interesting, super helpful, maybe, like why do I do that? What are all the reasons that I might war against, try to take control? And, obviously theologically we're fallen people. We naturally resist God's plan. So it should not be surprising. And that's probably something to remember, that there's part of our fallen selves that's always going to kind of want to get off the train or want to take the wheel. We don't want to give Jesus the wheel. Even though the song says, Jesus, take the wheel. So there's that. I think so. It's like the garden over and over again. And, that's kind of the very nature of sin, very nature of fallenness is. So it really shouldn't surprise us because obviously we do it all the time. But if we get a little deeper in there, like what else is going on? And I think, as I think you said, but part of us just resists this dependence, helplessness, this, that we're powerless to transform ourselves. As part of it just resists that we just don't, we don't like that, right? We don't like powerlessness. We want to, I don't know. It's the whole idea of Abraham and Sarah trying to take matters in their own hands. And here's Hagar. On the surface, that seems like, well, that's a crazy thing to do. But in a sense, I think all the time we're sort of hijacking God's transformation and trying to take it in our own hands because, part of our fallenness is we're just not comfortable with stuff being in God's hands, right? Or not in our hands, maybe. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's always the war between us trying to be self-sufficient. I mean, let's just say like this. Let's use another picture that the Bible talks about, like, abide in me as I abide in you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but how many of us today genuinely say, not perfectly, but I abided in Christ today? I mean, I can't say that. I can say that
right.
I prayed this morning and I had some meditation, and then I can also say that I forgot about that until right now.
Right.
100%. And I think in some level, like, I think it was one of my covenant profs talked about, like, he was telling on himself, but I'm a functional atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I believe in God, but then I function kind of as this atheist who, I got to make things happen.
Right.
I've got to figure it out.
Right.
I've got to take care of myself.
Right.
So I think there's that at play. But I was looking for this quote that I'd like to read also. It's I'm reading a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. I'm not really personally in this place right now, but I think it's a very applicable book to today. But he quotes. I think another reason, thinking of Abraham taking matters into his own hands, because God's promise rarely bears fruit in the season that we want it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So there's this quote from a Japanese theologian that says, God walks slowly because he is love. If he is not love, he would have gone much faster. Love has its speed. It's an inner speed. It's a spiritual speed. It's a different kind of speed from the technological speed to which we are so accustomed. It is slow, yet it is Lord over all other speeds, since it is the speed of love.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, so I think there's also a measure, especially today, with how accustomed we are to things happening somewhat rapidly.
Yeah.
We're very impatient when it comes to God's timing and fruition, and we're just very impatient with the spiritual process. So we want to take matters in our own hands.
Yeah, I think we're sort of utilitarian about most things. Like, if you can do it now or do it later, why would you wait? Why would you do it later? And so this sort of, where, as you say, God moves at a certain speed, but that's part of the whole point. He didn't make the promise to Abraham and Sarah and then sort of forget about it for a while. And, I'll get to it. It's in my calendar. It's on my list. He waited until it seemed impossible to fulfill for a reason. That, part of us waiting for him to fulfill his promise is part of our maturation. It's a necessary part of our maturation, because we would make God into a genie that we rub and get what we want immediately. And he's more interested in being trusted. And therefore, waiting is just part of his plan that we hate. And I do think, you talk about abiding in the vine, bearing fruit. There's a sentence in that passage that I think we, again, functionally atheists don't always believe, where Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing. It's in that John 15 passage, I think, or John 5, I can't remember.
Yeah, John 15.
Where, we don't think apart from me, we can do nothing. I don't know that I believe apart from him, I can do nothing. I mean, I believe it because it's in the Bible. Intellectually, I believe it. But I function as if I can do some things and then I need help. Where this is a transformative thing where I have to participate in the transformation, and the participation involves waiting, and it involves praying, it involves trust and dependence. Like there's a part for me to play, but none of that actually doesn't, he still has to do it and I have to wait for him. And that's just something that in the waiting, I think one of the reasons we want to take control is a bunch of other reasons, but it's I think what Abraham and Sarah were thinking, I'm not sure God's going to come through here. I mean, I'm just afraid he's not going to keep his promise. So I'm going to jump the gun. Now, we wouldn't say that. I mean, we don't believe that intellectually, but functionally, we're like, can I really count on God to do this?
But what we say, and that's where I really do like Jordan Peterson's, when he's questioned about if he believes in God or not, he says, who has the audacity to say something like that? He says, I try to act as if I believe God exists. And so you say, we would say that. And if we really want to examine ourselves in the faith, and obviously not go to shame or anything like that, but just look at what we do. It doesn't matter what we say. Right. I can say a lot of things. But let's look at what we do, because what we do and how we live and lean into the world actually reflects what we really believe.
Yeah, and so that's sort of functionally, can the Galatians get to the point where they internalize deeply the principle that keeping a law is A, impossible, and B, does nothing for them. And that's the point Paul keeps trying to drive home, and that's the point that we have to have as well, that we have to be transformed in order to have our life resemble anything like a law of love or law of Christ. And he has to do the transformation. We have a part to again, pray, read, serve, live in community, but all those things all of our actions don't transform. They're just sort of vehicles God uses, and we have to wait for them. And man, I think you can see it, you see it in the Old Testament, certainly in our society, where, you order something, and if it doesn't get delivered the next day, something's wrong, That's just, we've just become so accustomed to, you text somebody, you expect a reply like immediately, and we just live in an instantaneous feedback society. And part of what spiritual growth involves is waiting. Wait on the Lord is, I just think, such a foreign idea for us, but I think it's literally what Abraham and Sarah didn't do and what they needed to do. So that's sort of, as I'm, it's an obscure passage, and you could probably get into a lot of arcane details about it. But I think the main idea is clear, especially in light of the whole rest of the book. And it's, penetrating is, why do I resist God's transformation? Why do I not want to rely on him? Am I just afraid he's not going to come through? Do I not want to wait? All the above, I guess, right? We're basically describing the process of spiritual transformation. I do think in this sense. Go ahead.
Well, not to prolong, because it feels like we're coming to sort of conclusion, but I just think if I had to say it's one thing, maybe it's I would say fear.
Fear, yeah.
Like it's fear
yeah.
that causes us not to live in grace. Fear seems diametrically opposed to faith and to love.
I think we stopped. Did we stop? I don't know if we stopped updating here, but let's continue if we haven't, because part of my screen's frozen. You're still good, but do you see the counting?
The counting pause 2407.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what that's about. If that did happen, I'll just put an ending onto it or something.
Okay.
If it didn't, I think that's right. It's basically fear, lack of trust, and so let's leave it there. Trust in the Lord. Wait on the Lord. that's not just waiting for something someday that'll happen, but the waiting is one of the things that's happening, I think. So let's end it there. Till next week, grace and peace.
Thanks for listening to Rogue Table Talks. Be sure you're subscribed to our podcast wherever you listen and on our YouTube channel. Just search Rogue Table Talks.